Hello, hello, hello. We are live. Okay, that's great. Hi, my name's Zdybel. These are some of my great friends from Atari way back when. And we're going to go around and introduce ourselves, and then we'll move on with more talk and yak. So hope you enjoy the show.
Hi, my name's Brad Stewart. I work for...
Guys, speak up, please.
My name's Brad Stewart, and I work for Atari on Breakout, Asteroids, then went to Magic, and did Firefighter there. Can't remember if I did anything. Oh, Music Composer cartridge for the Atari 800. That was something.
Oh God, I wish I could find a copy of that.
And Codemaster.
Go out into the lobby, into the area where people are selling. You can probably find a copy of it.
I've seen 2 copies. They're out there.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
I'm Bob Smith. I was at Atari for about 18 months, did video pinball there, and then went off with Dennis Koval and Rob Fulop, and Brad joined us immediately for Magic. So I did a few Magic cards. Oh, I could list them: Dragonfire, Riddle of the Sphinx. I did the Star Wars arcade translation for the 2600. I actually worked on, I had a tiny, tiny bit of Brad's Asteroids, but I believe the talent was over here.
I'm the odd man here. I was in the arcade group. My name is Ed Rotberg. I did a number of arcade games. I'm not going to really list them all. Battlezone was probably the most famous of them. Did some stuff on the VCS, but not when I was with Atari. And yeah.
So it was a big club at Atari. We all worked in the same building together, coin-op, VCS. We visited each other. The reason Star Raiders is such a great game is because all the coin-op guys would come up and play Star Raiders and give Doug all kinds of, we all did. Everyone contributed to Star Raiders. And grief, yeah. And we'd go down there and give them shit for their games too. It was generally a wide community, and so Ed kind of fits in very naturally up here despite what he says. So we've got a lot to say and a limited amount of time to sit, and so I thought I'd poll the audience here and see what it is you guys want to hear about. Originally this talk was going to be a little bit technical about what actually goes on inside a 2600 game to put the display up on the screen. I see one head shaking already. And the fact is, of course, we're here to sign autographs at the end, and we'll be happy to entertain people who are seriously technical, but I know some of you guys are still out there writing Stella code. So after the show, you can always come up and ask us anything you'd like. We'll be happy to talk tech, turkey, all night. But generally what people want to hear is about the good old days, and we love doing Q&A. So I'm going to take a series of hands. How many people here would like to hear a little bit about how the 2600 actually works inside and what goes on a television? Okay. Okay, I guess we'll do a little bit of that. Okay, let me talk to you a bit about televisions. Does this come up here?
You can pull it out if there's enough cord, yeah.
Complicated technical.
Not where.
Over and under and...
Under,
Around and
Mike,
through.
I'm getting it slowly. Thank you for the technical stuff. I
Like
need
a
it.
wireless also for that.
Might be easier if you can click on.
Okay, TVs are really simple. You've all got one at home. Actually, they've changed a lot. But the old TVs looked like this. They had a flyback transformer in here, which you can hear. And it would draw a line like this, and a line like this, and a line like this, and a line like this. And once you reach the bottom, it would come back and draw it again, except every other line. So all you were seeing actually was every other line being drawn on your TV. And that filled the display. Anyway, as far as the 2600 program are concerned, your TV didn't look like a TV. Your TV looked like this. There's a thing up here called V-blank that tells you that the start of the frame has started, okay, that a new TV frame is going to be generated. And there's some time in here between that impulse and the time when the data actually starts hitting the screen. So that's precious time, is what that is. And then here off to the side of the screen, okay, there's actually a pulse that comes in at the start of every line. It's called H-blank. It tells the TV, TVs are pretty simple analog devices, and it tells it to kick the magnetron so it throws the beam on the other side of the beam, on the other side of the screen. And that means that the new line is starting, is what that tells you. So you get a signal that tells you when the frame is starting, a signal that tells you when the new line is starting. And then before the line actually starts displaying, you get a few precious cycles before, in the H-blank zone, before the TV screen actually turns on. Then there's this time here, and that's the display time. Okay, and that's basically simply how TV works. I don't want to get too much time into it because I think it's boring. So what a 2600 does is it draws on your TV in real time. As this TV beam is moving across the screen, I'm actually sitting there and drawing every damn pixel, or the hardware's helping me. I'm drawing everything as it goes by. This time on the 2600 was 76 machine cycles. 76 machine cycles. That's a number that's burned into any 2600 programmer's brain. They'll never forget that number. On the day they die, they will still know that fact. And that's not operations or anything, okay? That's machine cycles. It takes several machine cycles normally to turn over an operation. And once again, most of these gentlemen can tell you just exactly how many machine cycles are involved in every instruction that a 6502 executes. How many for a long jump, Brad?
I think it's 3.
Three for a short jump, 5 for a long one. Okay, so I'm wrong. Okay, so
Also count for page crossings. You also
If you've got,
we don't usually have page crossing.
yeah, that's,
Our
That's
machine is
advanced
much
hardware.
smaller. Yeah. So what you did actually on the 76 cycles is that gave you probably time to do maybe 24, maybe 30 machine instructions. Instructions like move to a register, move a register to another register, check a value, and branch. Now that kind of instruction, not an instruction that says fill an array or anything useful like that. Okay. And so that's what you did. And then inside the box, okay, there were a couple of registers, not that many. And they allowed you to draw figures. There was a register was 8 bits wide. It was called the player 0 register. And there was another register like that called the player 1 register. And you could set these 8 bits to 1s and 0s, right? And by doing so, making some sort of block figure. I don't need to illustrate that. I think you guys all get the idea behind that. And so what would happen is you tell the hardware, I want to trigger this guy about here on the screen. Okay, and so it would, right here, start the first line of this character. And then you'd have to tell the hardware, I want to trigger player 2, don't forget, I want to trigger him here on the screen. Okay, pretty soon your hands are full. And that's just running these 2 registers, player 1 and player 0. That gave you the 2 players that you see on the field. It's all done with those 2 guys. The mechanism behind all this is called a kernel. Not kernel, like kernel, like that, like a corn kernel. And a kernel was a repeating loop that would run usually either 76 cycles or 152 cycles, which happens to be exactly 2 lines. And this repeating loop would process the display. It would look at the line, say this is this line, there should be something starting on this line, or maybe nothing starting on this line, draw this particular thing, this figure is done on this line, get this stuff out of here, prepare to draw the next figure. Okay, all this stuff would be accomplished in, 40 or 50 machine instructions. Yeah, and on a good day. Hopefully, if you don't do too much branching, you didn't like to do a lot of branching inside a kernel. Okay, there was a saying in 2600 land that once you got a kernel up and running, you could take a 2-week vacation. Because
Only 2?
yeah, well, we didn't work that hard. I mean, that meant 2 weeks of not showing up at all. And because that kernel is your fundamental display. So once you could put a kernel up, you could move players around, and the VPs could all see, the basics of the game, and everyone could go, oh, I see you've been working. It took you months to put that damn thing together.
By the way, I'm a very visual person, and I used to sit down with a piece of graph paper and cut out little strips that were 2, 3, or 4 cells long that would represent an instruction, and then I would kind of rearrange them in this 76 cycle
Length
length, and try to figure out how to order the instructions to do the right thing on the screen.
Yeah, we really could have used a spreadsheet, but they hadn't been invented yet. So that's the basics of a little tight loop called a kernel, and this kernel stroked several registers. One was the P0, P1 register, which I've already described. That was your super duper register, because that had 8 bits. You could actually make an 8-bit character with that. And then there were several registers that controlled how that thing worked. How wide do you want that? How wide do you want it to be? Okay, and things like that. How tall it was, of course, was a function of whether you refreshed it or not. Okay, if you didn't refresh it, this bit pattern just keeps going on down the screen. And you can always tell when a 2600 program would crash because you get this thing like mattress ticking on the screen where all the registers are just displaying whatever happened to be in them. There were only a handful of registers to draw everything. The 2-player registers, and there were also 3 registers for what was called playfield. You got 20 bits halfway across the screen of this chunky stuff called playfield. I know you know what it looks like if you know what a 2600 is.
You actually got 40 bits.
No.
Because you were either repeated or
Because you reflected or repeated. Actually, all you got was 20 damn bits. Don't listen to them. And if you wanted your playfield not to be reflected, okay, or repeated, then that meant you had to reload these bits on the fly somewhere in this precious kernel. You had to not only handle both players, and there was also a 1-bit register called the ball. Now you had to handle that stuff, but now you want to put extra information in my kernel. I have to check on every line to see if I have to reload your stupid playfield or not. So yeah, it all added up. Everything you did got harder and harder. And yet people were able to do amazing, amazing, amazing stuff with this very primitive architecture. The first most amazing thing I ever saw was Space Invaders on the 2600. And Rick Maurer, thank you. I was going to say Maurer, I just thought it was wrong. Rick Maurer did that. He did a brilliant job. And what he did for that was a very special kernel. First, he found a way to put 6 characters up. Actually, I don't think Rick invented the 6-character kernel.
Wasn't that Carol?
It might have been Carol Shaw might have invented the 6-character kernel. I can't.
It might have been Dave Crane.
See, because when you had this player 0, not only could you dictate how wide it was, but you could also double or triple it. If you see the early 2600 games, they're very primitive. They're 3 airplanes flying around together, right? So what he did was player 0 would be here, and here, and here. And player 1 would be here, and here, and here. And if you don't think that takes some fancy dancing to reload those 6 on the fly in 76 cycles, think again. But Rick wasn't done. He wasn't done amazing my ass. He did this, and he taught it how to move back and forth somehow too. And that was the first piece of 2600 technology. I said that shouldn't be possible with this machine. And the other man who did a piece of technology that I didn't think should be possible with the 2600 at all was this gentleman sitting right here in the black shirt, who I think casually mentioned that he did asteroids on the 2600. That's like God casually mentioning it only took him 7 days to create the universe.
Well, the big thing there was we ran out of memory. And,
Wait, let me stop you here because I should tell people one other thing about the 2600. It had exactly 128 bytes of RAM. 128 bytes of RAM. That's 1 kilobit for those of you who are interested out there. And you better believe we used every bit in it because it had to be packed. There was no other way to do your game in 128,000 bytes. And on top of that, we had characters like Dave Crane saying everything's worth doing if you done in 2K. And that was your total ROM space. We had 4K bytes of memory, which, as you know, is about this much of a JPEG now. Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, yeah, we were trying to get asteroids to fit into the 4K, 2K space, right?
4K.
4K. And then we had to switch
We had to go to
over
8K.
to
So I added a
8K.
really ugly table to it.
When these guys are talking about 4K and 8K, for those of you who aren't aware, they're talking about the ROM space, the read-only memory. Can't touch it, it's very fast, you can read it out. And then the RAM was 128, and that's the only RAM you had. Fortunately, it was 0 page for the 6502, which meant it was very fast.
So Bob helped me out. We were trying to rewrite it to squeeze it down into 4K of memory, and between the two of us, we just could not do it.
What was
So
the majority of the space, extra space you used?
Well, the problem was, we had the old screen roll, and Rob mentioned, you have an underscan, then a screen, then an overscan. And if you happen to run over in your processing time, the screen starts to roll. So that's what was happening with asteroids, and I think it was a collision detector that was taking a long time. So we finally, I finally said, listen, if they'll give us 8K, we'll make this huge table. I mean, for a 2600, it was a huge table. It was probably, you know, a K. And that's, I mean, that's major.
So you were basically trying to use a table to implement software collision detection?
In the immortal words of Todd Fry, tables for time, ROM for RAM. You can always trade these things around.
Ouch.
Well, going to 8K would also require you to bank switch.
This is true, yeah. So we had to put some code in the very top part of the ROM, and then there was a special register you wrote to that would cause a bit to flip that would do the actual bank switch. And you had duplicate code in the other bank to then restore your execution back to where it needed to be in that bank.
Yeah, because the program counter had no frickin' idea what had happened.
That's right.
Yeah, it was a 6507. It only had 12 address lines, so
13.
it counted. Okay, it counted to 4K. That was
We only
it.
saw 4K. I don't know where they took, what they did.
No, we used the top bit. One bit said ROM or not ROM. And so the other things were all the lower half of memory.
Gotta cut down on that glue logic.
We made a huge strategic mistake.
By the way, this is Jody Kerr, one of the designers,
The designers of
2600.
Kind of blame for some of this stuff.
and his talk is right after this. So if you want to hear the really down and dirty stuff, you stick around for Joe's talk.
Wait, sir, you said you made a strategic mistake, sir, in your career. When was that?
The important mistake I believe that Atari made in 1977 was failing to realize, first of all, that, well, they underestimated drastically how many games people would buy per machine. They thought this machine will be obsolete in 2 or 3 years. We have to race like crazy to replace it.
It was.
And, well, it was wildly more successful than we expected because we had put the vertical control in the hands of the clever programmers rather than us hardware vendors who weren't looking far enough ahead. So we were wrong first there. And the second thing is, we underestimated how many games cartridges people were going to buy per family. And so when we sold, you know, we thought maybe they'd buy 3 or 4. They were buying like 10. When you sell that much commitment to your customers, at some point they own you. And we failed in 1977 to spend an extra $1, 50 cents on the processor to give it 64K addressing, and 30-pin rather than 28-pin cartridges for the ROMs, right? Because if we had done that, we could have defined an evolution,
Of larger
a
carts.
compatible evolution from the 2600 to later machines. We were so scared, we said, okay, we're going to jump all the way to something different for the computer. And we inadvertently abandoned our customers when we
Nah.
did that.
Yeah, that's true.
It took
It's a
them a
good
while
point.
to come up with the 7800, but I think that was too late.
7800 was a bad mistake. No, I disagree with you only in as much as I think the 800 computer was where we should have been. That should have been our home market machine. It was a big mistake not to go the full Tootsie with the whole market. What happened was our marketing group got infatuated with themselves and thought they were going to go toe-to-toe with IBM.
I think
Yeah, well, this-
marketing departments do that. It's a hazard.
With a 40-column screen. Okay, so that's what I was actually impressed most by Brad's effort is how he got so many spots moving around on the screen simultaneously. Remember, you only have 2 8-bit registers to do all that with. How the hell did you do that?
So he's moving them all the time.
I don't remember.
Let's say flicker.
Did it flicker? I don't recall actually. Yes.
Absolutely, yes, it had to.
Okay, because you're only drawing them every other
Every
frame.
other
That's
frame.
what flicker is about.
Yeah.
Okay? So to make your kernel simpler, what you frequently do 2-line kernel, as I already mentioned. That gets you twice as many cycles because you're thinking it. And people don't really, a 2-line pixel is basically a square pixel. It worked out pretty nice. And the other thing you could do was to alternate what you're doing every other frame, and only need half the logic each frame, or half the display each frame. Consequently, what the user sees is something that is gone, and and they see it doesn't seem quite substantial. It flickers, so stupid ghosts. Well, they're ghosts after all.
One other thing that we should talk about is what the evolution of the 2600 with respect to player resets. At the very beginning, the way a player is positioned horizontally is not this nice little register you write an X value in. You
That's what the
actually have
programmers
to
wanted.
strobe something at the time the beam is in that position. So reset kernels reset the players, and later, Space Invaders didn't need to reset players, right? Because we just had this long line, so there was no player resets. But a game like Asteroids, a game like Demon Attack, I used it in Riddle a lot. Everybody used it. Todd is a master of it. But these would have to be inserted between your regular kernels, because after you'd finished showing something and you wanted to use that player for another graphic, you needed to reset the player's horizontal position. And the only way to do that was to run a special kernel that had a strobe at exactly the right time to position the player. So Asteroids had plenty of that, and most of the later games were incredibly sophisticated. At the very beginning, there was an instruction called H-sync or W-sync. I forgot whether that's the Atari term or the Magic term. We had to rename all the mnemonics when we left Atari. Well, I didn't want to. Brad spent his first day at Magic in Court. I didn't want to do the same.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I probably should be pointed out as far as horizontal positioning is concerned, if you just use the reset registers, with the way that the processor is timed, you get essentially 15 pixel increments with each reset. And then on top of that, then you have to use the horizontal motion registers to take and find.
Right, again, if you look like at a game like Missile Command, where the missiles are coming in at an angle, you're seeing this marginal motion. Those are the black lines at the edge of the screen. Whenever you issue that command, it can move a player left or right 8 pixels.
And the black line was a hardware mistake when we designed the chip.
Really?
We used the wrong signal.
I'll be
The
honest.
routine that computed horizontal reset, that is, actually gave the programs the ability to locate a thing horizontally on the screen up to 160 from 0 to 159, was called
RST, I wrote it.
CHRST, which of course was pronounced just like Jesus.
And we wrote it because the
wrote
programmers
it.
wanted the ability to position things arbitrarily. And it would have, given that the chip was about 1/4 of an inch square with 10 micron features in 1976, it would have increased to switch to binary counters rather than shift register polynomial counters, and then put in the binary competitors, would have increased.
You're being interesting.
Why don't you just come up here?
If
He's
we
going to
had-
give it talking to them.
If we had designed the chip,
By cable in the ROM and a write directly into the polynomial counter with a smaller gate count.
it's true.
This is Todd Fry.
We didn't make the polynomial counters writable. That would have increased the area. If we had made them writable binary with binary counters, it would have made the chip at least 25 to 30% smaller based on what we could do at the time. And, management said, no, you have to tell Larry Kaplan, no, we can't do that.
Well, we survived.
Well,
Flourished.
survive is a relative term, but yes, it was successful.
We did well. The 2600 was very good to me.
Yeah, people still love it, as you can see. So, I think we've talked enough technical chat. I want to give a call out to Joe DeCure there, the great mind, and he'll be giving a talk here and just right after this one. And also shout out to my old office mate, Todd Fry, because he's going to be talking about kernels more at 7 o'clock. So I think what we'll do here is give the rest of the audience a chance to just open floor questions about, well, whatever the hell you'd like to hear. You there.
Hey, so it sounds to me like you guys were acutely aware of the limitations of the hardware at the time, which is easy for us to look at now in retrospect, but how were you that aware of the limitations of the hardware in 1977?
Yes, absolutely. You couldn't design a game without being aware of the limitations of the hardware.
And it's the thing that really sparked the creativity. You knew the bounds of what you were working with, and you were always trying to push up against the edge of those bounds, find new ways to restructure your kernel, to just do different things. And it really, I think, in many ways, it aided the creativity of the games being developed at that time. It limited the production value, but the gameplay, I think, will probably gain something out of that.
And that's ironic, because this is the coin-op guy, okay? And you asked if we were aware of the technical limitations of our 128 bytes of RAM. Okay, yeah, even then, you know, we kind of were aware. But what made us really cruelly aware of our technical limitations is the fact that these boys, every team consisted of a programmer and a hardware engineer, and they would custom build hardware for your game. So yeah, we were painfully aware of how we were constrained.
So a very quick question related to what you just discussed was really coming from coin-op to consumer and doing that later on. What was the curve there? Did you find the severe limitations of the 2600 to be a challenge that you were able to push against, or was it just really very tough as opposed to doing the freeform you had more in the arcade side?
Well, it was always very tough. That was part of the fun. It's like when you play a game that is really, really hard and you figure out how to beat it, you get this incredible satisfaction. And the same thing was true, you know, having success writing my first kernel was a guess. Then the next thing was, I need to do something none of these guys have ever done before. Unfortunately, the games we did at Vidya, I don't know, I've heard that there are some of them around somewhere, but they didn't really get wide distribution. And you know, I did some anti-aliasing in a kernel. Hadn't been done before. It wasn't a particularly wonderful thing, but it was just something that hadn't been done before. And just that kind of thing. It was, you know, very, it inspired you to push a little harder. Try to find some niche that these incredibly talented guys didn't pick at first.
Way back in the back there.
With the advent of all the homebrew that's been going on, have any of you guys been tempted to revisit either some of your old games or create new ones to start marketing today?
Well, for speaking for myself, I can say, hell no. There's so many nicer platforms. I'm more of a game designer, and I want more power. 2600 was great. It was fun in its day. But that's just speaking for myself. This gentleman here actually finished a 2600 game, what, last year? It was about last year. So.
Yeah, I decided that I would do a 2600 game, so I did it, but I stuck to old hardware. As cool as it would be to have RAM on the cartridge and lots more speed and lots more RAM without bang switching or ROM, I didn't go for it. I decided to just do classic hardware.
Back there?
Whenever you're playing like a 2600 game, you'll notice there's like those weird black bars inside. What are those all about?
Joe was just talking about those. Those are the H pause lines. Whenever you stroke the H reset register to synchronize a player to locate it on the screen, you get one of those. Please. H move, sorry.
Right, okay, so.
It's been a long time.
Count on out, you hit the reset, that zeroes out the poly counter. And you jump here, I can actually recite Christ from memory right now.
It's only 7 lines, folks.
Okay, then you pop your H move value in the H move register, nothing happens. You pop your W sync, and you hit the H move strobe, and that starts storing H moves. That starts the H move counter, either blocking actually pulses to the poly counter to move it left or right. I believe Joe will actually testify during his, that there's a bug that turns off the display for a certain number of cycles into the screen if you hit the H move strobe.
Exactly.
Which shouldn't have
that was
occurred, okay, because normally, the way these guys had envisioned using the machine, you would do all the setup during H-blank, or during V-blank off the screen,
V-blank.
and no one would see it.
So we thought it wouldn't matter.
Right. Now, actually, I was in the lab one day with Steve Wright, and he was bringing the VPs through the lab, which kind of irritated everyone. We had a building that was separate from the damn VPs, and we liked it that way. And so he was bringing these jerks in through our building and trying to show off. And he was doing Pele soccer at the time. And he brought the VPs in, and one of them then saw the H-Sync lines on the side and said, "What are those?" And he said, "Oh, those are referees following the players around." Who else would like to ask a question? You there.
This is a question more for Bob and Brad. And I hope this isn't rude, but what could you tell me about the legal trouble you faced with Atari in Magic?
We were sued for mopery and dopery. I mean, it was, essentially, they maintained that we had walked out with trade secrets, which we hadn't. So we were in court one day, and Brad should probably talk about it. He was there.
Yes, that was my first day with the Magic, was in court. And I was there with a guy named Mark Bradley, who was marketing. And we both got sued, and it was a pretty cut and dried procedure, actually, because we went into the courtroom and Atari presented their side, Magic presented their side, and the judge just looked it over for a little bit and said, "I see nothing here," and I was free to go.
You see, the technical trade secrets are all in the heads of the programmers. You know, the machine, remember, only has a few dozen registers. You can memorize the damn thing and walk out of the building. It was dumb. Joe has another comment.
Yeah, for them also, the ground had been paved by the first gang of four, the guys who started Activision. And they had convinced the court that it was possible to reverse engineer the design without trade secrets or patent infringement. And the courts also ruled that if your line of work is, I'm a game designer, you can't be prevented from practicing your craft, at least in the state of California. And so if the judge didn't see any new evidence that they'd walked out with anything, they're free. I'm so glad for them.
Yeah, I think it's good for the industry. The competition was healthy.
Yeah, we actually had the chip peel by a man named Jesse Cable, so we had a complete reverse engineering of the TIA to work with, and that was our legal standing to form the company and not have taken their trade secrets.
Mr. Redhead.
In history, that was possible. The chip now is gibberish at 4 nanometers.
So you mentioned Activision, and I know when Activision was formed, they immediately started creating a lot more complex games for the VCS. If you guys hadn't been under the time constraints that you had been under to pump software out of Atari, do you think you guys would have? Do you think Activision just would never have formed, and you guys would have?
No. There was no time pressure on programmers at Atari.
As long as you had something ready every 6 months.
Pretty much, you cranked out a product.
One case.
Listen, yeah,
Yes, Howard's case was special.
I wrote one in 6 weeks too, Howard. That was a later Atari. But generally, at young Atari, which is before, he's talking Activision era kind of, then no, there was no real time pressure. You basically, that was about made the job so beautiful. You came in, they said, okay, you're hired. Here's a TIA manual. Here is a lab station where you can work. And here's a desk where you can squat. And have a good time, make a game. And that's what you did. And people did all sorts of games that they wanted. Bob wanted to do a pinball game, so he did a pinball. Turned out to be fantastically popular. Just like Howard said earlier in his talk, no one knows what they're doing. We threw a lot of darts at the wall, and some of them turned out to be really great games, and some turned out to be turds. But what you're seeing in the case of Activision is not so much a progression of games as the continual progression of technology in 2600. And I do feel that in many ways, Pitfall Harry shows that Dave was pulling his punches toward the end of his 2600 career at Atari and was saving up some ammo for his future. Because that has a couple of neat features in it. If Dave was up here, I'd love to have him talk about it. That's a nice kernel in Pitfall Harry. And also, Howard was also talking about the evolution of games earlier from single screens to larger spaces. And that was something also that was being experimented in that era that maybe makes games seem like they're more innovative. But it was innovation all the way down the line. But this idea that, yeah, I can break away from the single screen by having multiple screens or having scrolling between screens. And that's what Pitfall Harriet, to my mind, really showed. That was like, I think, the first really scrolling 2600 game. And he did a beautiful job. It was a great job.
I just want to make one comment real quick about deadlines and, having to do things under duress. Certainly, Howard Scott Warshaw's ET game was probably under the most duress of any project I've ever seen. In coin-op, it was a different world, because we had this beast called manufacturing. And you can't have all these people hired on and then have nothing for them to work on because you're throwing away money. So there were schedules that, you had to be finished by your time so you don't have a hole in the manufacturing line, because they would project everything out. And if a game fell really badly behind schedule, they would find the sucker that was behind him and push him forward. So we had a different set of pressures, definitely, on the coin-up side.
How about you there? Yeah, why not?
So the VCS only has one button, which maybe makes the programming a little easier but limits your gameplay. Do you feel like it was a blessing or a curse to have that controller?
I love that controller. I really love that controller.
I like the 4-button controller. And, Mattel was reading their controllers through the OS, so it was horribly unresponsive. And we ran a frame, 60 times a second, so we always had responsive controls. And that's one thing we all like about the 4-button controller.
And don't forget, that was not our only controller. We had a lot of controllers. We were just discouraged from using them. But my favorite was the gray code controller that was used in the racing game. It actually outputted gray code. For those of you who maybe know what gray code is, it's a binary encoding scheme. That was pretty slick. I like that one.
It could rotate 360 degrees and the pots could not.
Yeah. How about you in the white shirt there?
What was your testing environment like? You sit down to write code. Is there a quick turnaround where you test it? Or did you have
We sat down. We had a 1611A logic analyzer, and any engineer today would give his eye teeth for that kind of debugging capability, because that little puppy would record 64,000 machine instructions before, after, or during any event you wanted. And so you could just say, gee, my code's running off the rails. It's doing something really nasty. Okay, tell the logic analyzer to trigger on the nasty, and you will see 64,000 instructions that precede that nasty. And you can tell exactly what was going on the bus at every minute. So we had a great debugging tool beyond belief. On the other hand, we typed our stuff in through ADMAs, kept it on 7.5-inch floppies, and loaded it into a black box that was all wire wrap. And so subsequently it was not 100% reliable, to the point where 2,600 programmers would go, whoa, it's my black box that gave me a problem. It's not my code that's screwing up, all right? A personal story, I used to keep a 6502 in a frame above my desk, because as an early programmer, I caught my 6502 adding 2 numbers and coming up to the wrong, it was right there on the logic analyzer. You could see it was adding 2 numbers and getting the wrong result. The 6502 actually had 2 arithmetic modes, binary and binary coded decimal. And a common rookie's mistake was leaving the machine in BCD, because you do your scoring in BCD, right? And then, and forget to put the machine back into binary mode, and then look, it's adding these numbers, it's getting wrong results. So I actually had a technician come out. I was so convinced that I had done that. And I had him pull the microprocessor and replace it with a fresh one, which remarkably did the same thing. So he kept that around for a while. But as a reminder, it's rarely ever the hardware.
That was one of the joys of coin-up, was since we were getting new hardware for pretty much every game, was helping the hardware engineers bring up the hardware and debug it. So we really often had, maybe not adding 2 numbers, but we often had a reason to believe that the hardware was broken. And it made for a very interesting interaction between the programmer and the hardware engineer at times.
Your bug? My bug. Who's bug? How about you on the right there, the black shirt?
So with things like, demo seed and homebrews and whatnot, I was curious, at the time, have you ever received unsolicited software or technical things from the public? And if so, are there any interesting stories?
No, that stuff was intercepted before it got to us. Anyone who sent junk like that to corporate would get that stuff. And then it would trickle down, what's the name of that pit dash? the guy who runs Boulder Dash. Then stuff like that would come down to my desk finally, and the management came to my desk with Boulder Dash and said, and also the Mars Caverns of Mars, and said, what do you think of these games? I said, fairly amateurish. We could do them here quite easily. And like, fine, we're publishing them anyway. Screw you.
I remember that.
Black shirt.
So, going back to what you guys were saying about limitations that you guys have to deal with, would you say that in modern game programming or just programming in general, would you say that it's better now to have more limitations, or do you think that having, or rather I should say more options, or would you think it's better to have more limitations?
Oh, it's a wash. There's nothing easy about making a modern Counter-Strike game, kids. It is a lot of hard work. What's different is that now there is, 100, 200 people doing that work, okay? And you're all kind of pocketed into doing different things. I've been telling my programming staff for years, learn a specialty, because the generalists, we're a dying breed. But that's what made it special, was the fact you did everything and it was your own creation. And because of that, you had 100% creative control. And that really is a magical thing. And that gives you a much wider number of flowers blooming than when you have a bunch of execs saying, we want Counter-Strike 3, and it's going to be brown and gray, damn it. And so, but I don't think the technical challenges are any less, and I don't think that the people doing work today are doing any less good work than us. I think there's some fantastic stuff in there.
I think when we were coding, it was, okay, here's the task. There's really only one way to do it. And these days, you spend hours thinking, okay, there's about 50 different ways I could do this. How do I do it? So
Yeah, and the
it's
other
different
thing,
that way.
you have to be a manager now to get a game out. I mean, you have to know how to manage a group of people, get them to work together. It was, very small, if more than one person teams. A whole different scenario and easier to deal with.
Really, you gotta be financier and round up a couple $100 million.
Wouldn't hurt. Who else has questions for Green Shirt?
Question for Ed. I'm a big fan of the Point Out Battlezone, and I know what I've read online, but just kind of wanted him to go through his history with the game and how that game evolved or began.
Please tell the story of the military.
Oh, no, I did. Actually, that was not the question, so I can get out of that one.
No, come on,
So what was the history of Battlezone? Like the consumer group, the guys in the VCS group, CoinUp would have brainstorming sessions where they would encourage everybody in the department, didn't matter what your job was, to contribute ideas that might go into a game. And so I cannot take credit for the concept of Battlezone. That was handed down to me as, here's a game concept. The good news is back then, as much different from today, when you got your game concept, it was not fully fledged out what was going to happen at every moment in the gameplay. It was, hey, let's do a tank battle game in 3D. Going through to make this a long story short, we knew we had the vector generator that let us do games like Asteroids, and we knew if we added enough power to be able to do some 3D transforms, we could do a 3D game. And so there was a math box built into it, and then it was a matter of sitting down and figuring out how to design a game that could be played in 3D. It was in this case it was fairly straightforward. It was an analog to the original tank game that had two tanks that you were looking down on top. It was a raster game. Combat. Well, Combat was the VCS version of it, but there was an arcade version called Tank.
That's right.
Yes.
And so it was basically, well, let's try to do something like that. Well, we decided to put in some other features in landscape so you would be able to stay oriented, not just have the background shifting. And then it was a matter of working, with the vector generator and figuring out how to work between one processor. The vector generator was a separate processor. It was a state machine. And then there was the math box, which was a 2901 bit slice system that was put together. And Mike Alba programmed that when we gave him the correct algorithms to program it. Mike Alba was an amazing programmer. Talk about someone who could count cycles and do amazing things with 6502 code. He was a miracle worker. And then, my part was basically creating the game, figuring out tricks, like when you blow up a tank and it looks like this thing is tumbling in 3D, it's only rotating in 2D. We just designed the object and pre-tilted it on its axis because we were not doing 3x3 transforms. For those of you who are into this, we were doing 2x2s. There were a lot of cheats in Battlezone, but that's what you had to do for the capability we had at the time. I'll leave it at that. I'll just-
Ask him about the volcano.
No, don't ask me that.
That was my other question. Is it true?
All right, there was a guy who shared a lab with me. His name is Owen Rubin. He was known as the Black Thumb of Atari because he could break any game. If you wanted to debug it, you let Owen play with it for a little while, and he'd crash it sooner or later. But he was a programmer, and Roger Hecker had drawn out the silhouette of the background, basically, the mountainscape. And he had drawn in a volcano. And I was dealing with, nasty problems doing 3D collision detect, which still was a problem. It was that much worse than doing the 2D collision detect that was normally going on in most of the games at that time. And so I was fighting these nasty problems. Every day Owen would come in and say, when are you gonna make the volcano active? And I would, ignore him, or I'd come back with some nasty retort. And finally, I said, look, if you want that volcano active, you write the code. So I came in the next morning, and there was a listing sitting on my desk, on my chair, actually, and I go through it, it says, make volcano active, and it was, a handful of lines, maybe 24 lines of code. And so I put it in, and it worked the first time, and the volcanoes were active. I had very little to do with it.
But I asked him to tell that story because it's so indicative of how the shop worked.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're working with peers. I'll say this, speaking of the Atari group collectively, that was and Howard alluded to this, it was a very, very special period of time. We've all gone on and done other things in the games industry, worked at many places, done lots of other games. That group of people at Atari is just far and away the most creative and talented group of people I've ever worked with. We worked together, we played together, we went out and partied together, we helped each other move from house to house. It was a very close-knit, very cool group of people. Never experienced anything like that since.
We need to wind up, guys.
Yeah.
Are we out of time? Yeah. Jody, curiosity.
Can I add something to that? When the mic's live, I used to go to work every day and I think, they're gonna pay me to do this?
Yeah.
I mean, we used to joke, told Nolan this joke again 6 weeks ago, that, we would sometimes imagine having a coffee can with a coin slot on the top, and we would put quarters into it once in a while to keep our jobs. It was that much fun. Did you follow that, or should I repeat that? Yeah, it was that good. I've gone through my life since then, and I've only had one other job that was close to as much fun as working with those guys. I recommend a book called Atari Inc. Business is Fun. I consider that the definitive social history of Atari at the time.
I'll put in a plug for Howard's wonderful video, Once Upon Atari. I'm in it. Chris will be outdoors signing autographs and shooting the shit with anyone who cares to waste their time.
Share a quarter of the pie.
That's a funny.